So this video in my HomeLab build series is about the Juniper EX3300 network switch. So I have two of these switches right now. One of them is the power over Ethernet variety, which I ordered on eBay in questionable condition. Right after ordering that switch, I found a Facebook Marketplace listing of someone giving away a EX3300 non-PoE switch that was sitting in a box in their garage with an old firmware image and a corrupted backup image, but otherwise it worked. So I was able to get both of those switches working great, so I thought I'd make a video of the journey to get them fully working. Also make a fan mod to get them quiet for home use, and go through the setup and troubleshooting that I had to figure out to get these fully working. Anyway, I think these are really cool switches that just look cool in the home server rack. They have 4 10 gig SFP plus ports, which can take fiber, RJ45 10 gig, or direct attached cables I plan to make full use of. I went with a 24 port variety, which is plenty of capacity for my home network. I also got the power over Ethernet, so I plan to attach security cameras as well as enterprise Wi-Fi access points. Anyway, I have timestamps in the description below if there's anything you want to skip ahead to. Hopefully this is helpful to someone, and if you have any questions, feel free to post a comment and I'll do my best to try and answer. Right off the bat, there were a few things to be concerned about with this switch. As we can see here, the seller didn't take a whole lot of care in taking time to stage the product. It's kind of just precariously stacked on some other stuff that looks like some sort of industrial power supply that it's balanced on top of here. But like I said, this was the cheapest Juniper EX3300 24 port with PoE capability on eBay, and the seller sent me an offer that was considerably cheaper than what they had listed, so I decided to take a risk and go with it. The listing itself said that power on testing was performed, but didn't include any photos of the switch actually powered on, so who knows what that actually meant. I mean, it could mean you stick a power cord in there and a power light comes on and then you unplug it. It doesn't say whether the LED display displays anything or it boots up, or who knows. So it was a big unknown here. The packaging itself that it shipped in was pretty interesting. It shipped in a black garbage bag wrapped in saran wrap, or we call it saran wrap here, but static wrap that uses static to cling to itself. And then it was wrapped up in some, looks like recycled packaging material, and the switch itself was also wrapped in static wrap. So instead of shipping in static safe packaging, it was wrapped in static generating packaging. So at this point I was really starting to regret my decisions. I could have spent an extra $20 and got a fully tested switch from a reputable refurbisher with rack ears and a power cord and ready to go. But I decided to take on this challenge without really thinking it through. Well, that got a little smashed. You can just feel the static charge on that stuff when you're taking it off. I hope just packaging, unpackaging, they didn't do anything. Looks like zero care. I mean, of course, I kind of knew that from the listing. Does this have a bend to it? It almost kind of looks like it's going like this. So before trying to power it on for the first time, I went ahead and wiped it down with some isopropyl alcohol just to get some of the exterior smudges off of it. It also had a pretty strong smell of Lysol to it that I wanted to get rid of. I was going to do a deeper clean, but wanted to at least try to power it on first before I dig into it to see where I'm starting from. And we're about to see that didn't go super well. So that was the breaker that we just saw trip.
Wasn't expecting that.
So I tried again one more time just to be certain it wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't, before I started tearing into the switch to see if I could figure out anything that's wrong with it.
It's definitely nothing in this should trip the GFCI breaker. Hopefully this is something that it's an easy fix. The inside is not horribly dirty. That's crazy. Wait a minute. It looks like someone's been in here. So it looks like this cable here, some of these cables are getting smashed. Yeah, that is definitely some damage there. Unlikely that that happened in shipping. But that's going to create, for sure, even though that's a ground pin, that's going to create a ground fault.
So after finding that damaged wire that was getting crimped by the chassis, I went ahead and wrapped it up with duct tape, hoping that's gonna fix the ground fault problem. So it was tripping a GFCI breaker in my house. It wasn't a standard household breaker because this is in a covered patio area. Unfortunately, just wrapping that wire up did not fix the issue. I was at this point disconnecting everything on the board, so right now just the power supply here is plugged in and it's not triggered. The lights are still on, it's not triggering a ground fault. So then after that I went through and plugged parts in one at a time. So here I'm plugging the main board back in to see if the main board's part of the issue, and then later on plugging in the second power plug on the main board, and finally the riser card. And eventually found out that I could plug in everything except for the riser card, and the riser card, whatever that board is doing, seems to trigger the ground fault. So I took apart the board, wasn't able to see anything, but saw, there's some dust bunnies here inside the switch ports. So I decided to take everything apart, blow the dust off, put things back together, see if that fixes the ground fault issue. And so I wasn't actually able to figure out this ground fault issue. Eventually, I plugged into a regular household outlet in one of our bedrooms, and the switch came up fine. I didn't trigger a household breaker. I don't know if that's a design or assembly problem with this particular switch, but running on like a normal household outlet, it doesn't seem to cause any problems for me so far. I'm wondering if there's some point where they have ground and chassis connected together, or but yeah, or there's possibly some leakage in my GFCI breakers sensitive in my basement. So once I got this switch powered up, I had some problems with lag in the front display where response was just really slow compared to the other switch I was running. button presses will either register as the wrong button or register as a double press or not register at all. So you can see it's taken a long time just to update here, which made it kind of impossible to get into the EZSetup menu, which is what I did on my other switch. It's just kind of jumping around all over the place. And so this switch has the version 15 firmware on it, which is the latest JunOs, which is also significantly larger. So this is my older Juniper switch, and it has the V12 firmware on it, which is a much smaller memory footprint, and the latest one that Juniper recommends on running on these switches because of the smaller footprint. So I decided to roll back the switch to the latest V12 version from V15. So I'm going to go ahead and show that here. As far as getting the actual firmware package goes, Juniper keeps updates behind paid support packages, but it is possible to find images pretty quickly on some search engines, and they're available for downloading, especially in countries with strong right to repair laws. Shown here is the name of the V12 image that I used, so you can search for those. So these packages are signed by Juniper, and the switch verifies the package signature before install, so it would be nearly impossible to get a tampered image and be able to install it on the switch. You can see that the V12 image, it's 100 megabytes compared to 125, so a 20% smaller footprint, and supposedly expectedly uses a lot less memory. But I did find the V12 package to be a lot more responsive, especially in the user interface once it's installed. Next, I'm going to show how to reset the switch to factory settings and get into the EZSetup GUI menu, and also do the firmware update through the GUI. If you can get into the EZSetup menu, you can get the switch going just with a regular old Ethernet connection and not need the console serial cable for the back. Most of the YouTube guides that I found set up the switch with the serial cable, but I prefer the GUI setup if you can get it going, which can be a bit finicky to get into. But if you can do that, you can avoid buying the serial cable. For me, I just want to be able to use a switch in my home. I'm not looking to be a network engineer or learn Juniper's proprietary CLI beyond what I need to. One thing to say is on my eBay switch, I did end up falling back to setting up the switch through the console setup because of issues I had with the front display, but on the switch I got off Facebook Marketplace, I was able to do it entirely over the EZSetup. So first thing you want to do on the front display is press the menu button until you get to the maintenance menu, then press enter, then the menu button again until you see, if you don't see the EZSetup, try first to do the factory default, which is this setting, then press enter, then restore default, enter again. Wait for this to go until it resets. Now it should be reset back. See if we see it again. No, still not in the EZSetup menu. So that doesn't do often a full factory reset. What you can do then is open the case up, and there's this green reset button here. Push that and it sends the switch into a full reset. So after opening the case up, the switch will reboot, and then you go back into the maintenance menu, and then there's system halt, system reboot, load rescue, keep going through, and you see the EZSetup now appears after doing the green reset button. So it'll initialize, and it will tell you to connect an Ethernet port, an Ethernet cable to port 0, which is at the top left there. thing you want to do, make sure Wi-Fi is disabled so that you're connecting over your connected Ethernet port. And the IP address that's going to be assigned by default to the terminal is 192.168.1.1. So if you get in successfully, you'll get into this setup menu. You got to be quick here. I think it's only a few minutes that you have to actually set all your settings, your host name, root password you need to set in order to enable a lot of settings. So you want to set both of those. Also get your time zone, everything else going there. So I'm using this on my home network, so I choose inbound management, and then you'll just want to choose a management switch. So I'm on the standard 192.168, but just an IP address that you're going to remember, write it down to access the switch UI on your network. So I just have 192.168.1.180 that's not in my DHCP range, but I recommend setting one. I don't know if there's even an option to DHCP it, but I don't recommend doing that. Make sure you just have a standard IP address. So yeah, so set a static IP address for the management address, and then also set your gateway on your network, so any outbound requests go to the right place. One thing I recommend if you don't have a specific management network is also enable SSH access. So if you have to access the CLI from somewhere else, there could be some security concerns with that, but you'll just access it with root and password. And then go ahead and click finish. It'll sit there for a while, so if you take too long to go through this menu, like I think I did in this particular setup, you'll have to go through it again to get everything set. There's a timeout on the actual EZSetup, so make sure to work pretty quickly. So once you click the finish button, a configuration delivery screen will pop up, and if it's successful, the switch will reboot with the correct settings. Otherwise you'll have to start over. So this is the GUI. Once you're done, you log into the same IP address, so it's got a nice dashboard there. To get the firmware update started, pretty self-explanatory. Go into the maintain menu, upload software, pick your firmware image, hit OK. So it's a pretty standard firmware update thing. Do reboot is required, and upload an install package. And once you do that, it's going to just sit here and do nothing for couple minutes. I think it sat here for close to 5 or 10 minutes. Looked like it was doing nothing. The only indication I had that anything was going on is there was a lot of activity on the network port that my laptop was connected to. So that gives some sign that it's actually reading the file. And I think I had the file I was uploading on a USB key, which probably slowed things down quite a bit. So I'd recommend just keep it, if you're gonna use the GUI, keep it locally on your SSD or something, so that it uploads as fast as possible over 1 gig to the switch, because it's only like a 100 megabyte file, but it took quite a while in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to where it actually starts to update the image. So eventually the screen will change. I think depending on your browser, it looks like there's some parts of the display that do not show up correctly. So it looks like it's doing nothing for a long time. Then you get this screen, and it'll gradually go through all of these steps, and eventually get to reboot. You want to be around because you've got to click a button at the end to reboot everything. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this down so we can see the rest of the steps. Yeah, so once it's all done, you just click OK. Screen's going to go blank. The switch will reboot in a minute, and when it comes back, you should be able to check on the front display or log into the GUI with the IP you selected to see that it's updated. So now I'm going to go ahead and show how to do the first time setup as well as the firmware install with a serial console cable. So what you'll need is one of these Cisco compatible USB console cables. Plug that in, and then I have a USB set up to my Mac. So after plugging in your USB console cable, I give the instructions using GNU Screen, which is available on Mac OS, Linux, as well as Windows subsystem for Linux. So first thing in there, you're going to want to do a ls /dev/tty star, and that'll give you a list of the USB devices on the system with TTY capability. You want to look for the ones specifically that are USB serial devices. So mine is the example listed here below, where it's screen-dev/dev/tty USB serial -A9 etc. 9600, and that will connect you at 9600 baud to the console port.
9600. Let's see if we get anything. Oh, we get something. So this got through where the front panel did not. So hopefully this fallback works.
When you do finally get to the login screen of the console, the default login is root, and leave the password blank. If there is a password that was already set on the switch, try going ahead and pressing the green reset button. If you go back to the previous section on GUI setup, I show where that is, and it's inside the unit itself. And that should get you to a point where you can just log in with root and no password. So one of the things with these switches is they have both a primary and backup boot image. So one of the first things you want to check when you get it up is see what the state of that is. And there's three commands here. You need to be into CLI mode. Then I'll show how to run the show system snapshot media internal, which shows the state of both backup of both boot images. And you can also do a request system snapshot slice alternate, which copies the current boot image into the backup partition. So one of the switches I got off of Facebook Marketplace had a corrupt backup image that it wouldn't boot from. You could have the reverse case where the primary image is corrupt and you're booting off the backup image. This will help show what's going on. So I think in the case if you have a corrupt backup image, you want to just do a firmware update of the primary image and get that fixed, and then boot from that. And then once everything's working good, you'll want to request a system snapshot slice alternate. So in this case, I had already updated the image on my EX3300 PoE, and I wanted to update the backup image so that it matched the primary image, which I already had set up exactly how I wanted it to work. So this show system media snapshot internal command, you can see it here, it prints out firmware version 12.3 in the primary partition, and then the original 15.1 on the backup partition, which is the one I had the lag problems with, slower display on the front. I just wanted to get them both on the same revision of the firmware. And it takes a while to format the alternate root part, the secondary partition. I actually edited this down, but it takes a good 10 minutes to finish the snapshot, and then it comes back with a success message once that's done. And that's it. You'll just see a simple message that it finished archiving, and you can run the show system snapshot media internal command again to see how things look now. And you can see both snapshots match up to the same thing. So in this section, I show how to set the switch back to defaults. So you're probably not going to want to do this if your switch does not have a valid backup image or you're booting from the backup image. So go ahead back to the last section of this video and make sure that's good, because you don't want to screw something up and see your backup image that you're booting from or not have a valid backup image and start with this. But this is if you don't know what the settings are on the switch and you just want to go back to default. This will also free up some disk space if you don't have enough space to copy on your new firmware image, so it could be useful in that case. So I ran this command without having a valid backup image on the switch I got off of eBay, which is pretty risky, but I didn't know better at the time. So it's worth making sure that the backup image is set correct before doing a factory reset. But it's just this, enter CLI, and then run request system zeroize will set the system back to defaults. And finally, we get to the steps of updating the firmware on the EX3300. So I got these steps from another YouTuber, urtech.ca, more or less, and changed them around a little bit. Also copy these down into the description of the video, so you can just copy paste there. But first thing you'll do is format a USB drive to FAT format, and go ahead and copy the file on there. I renamed it to EX3300.tgz to make it a little easier to type things out. After entering into the CLI mode, we're going to run request system storage cleanup, and this is going to clean up any temporary files and the local storage to make sure there's enough space for the firmware update operation to run, as well as make sure there's enough space to copy over the firmware image from the USB drive. After that's done, we're going to do a ls/dev/da star to see where our attached USB drive is located, so you can unplug the drive to see the drive name. Then we're going to do a mkdir to create a folder called /var/temp/USB to mount the drive to. Run mount _ms-dos fs to mount the USB drive to the folder which we just created, and then we're going to want to do an ls of that temporary folder where we map the USB drive to make sure we see our firmware image, and then we're going to copy that image from the mapped var-/temp/USB folder into just /var/temp, and that moves it into local storage for the firmware update operation. After the file copy, we'll just do a quick ls to make sure that the file copied over. Then we go back into CLI mode. And now we're ready to run the actual command to perform the firmware update. The entire process, once it kicks off, can take several minutes to complete. This version's edited down, so expect it to take longer than what it takes here. But at the end of the entire process, after it checks the signature and updates everything, it will prompt you for a reboot. Then, after rebooting, you can go ahead and go into either the steps at the start I showed at the start to check the firmware image version through the front display, or you can go in and check the version of the primary and backup images to verify that it updated. One of the other service items I performed on this switch was to clean the front panel buttons with DeoxIT. After cleaning up the storage on the switch and setting back to defaults and also rolling back the firmware to version 12.3, the front panel LCD display was much more responsive. But the front panel buttons still occasionally would register either double presses or pick up the wrong button being pressed, or not registering at all. So I figured it was worth trying to clean off the buttons and lubricate them with DeoxIT to see if that helped make things a little better. So right here I'm disassembling it. There's just 4 little tabs after you screw everything out to take it apart, and pretty much the clamshell, the front of the LCD display comes off without too much trouble. And you can see 2 little gamepad style buttons there. So I just got some DeoxIT and put 2 little drops on both sides of the contacts. And this is a pretty common, it's for metal on metal primarily, but it seems to work in a lot of situations where you have a kind of push button or potentiometer or almost anything to clean things up over time as well as improve responsiveness. Putting the display back together is pretty much just the reversal of taking it apart, essentially just clamping the things together and putting the tabs back into position so it stays together. There's the brace there that it's a little difficult to get things oriented correctly, but it all snaps together pretty nicely. And this is the end result. It's pretty much just as responsive as my other switch. Sometimes I fumble finger it, but I think it's more me than the actual buttons themselves. So this seemed to work. So the last thing I did was a fan mod, and I ended up going with the Arctic 40mm S4028-6K. So the Noctua fan, which a lot of people use, is about 50% more expensive than this fan. But at the same time, the Arctic delivers almost double the static pressure and about double the CFM, at least according to the specifications. So it's kind of a no-brainer. The actual fan mod on this is pretty straightforward. You're just removing some screws. It doesn't need to be repinned at all. So a 4-pin header will fit on the first 3 pins. There's no PWM control on the motherboard. But I do find that there's no alarms due to the fan mod, which is really nice because I've had other server equipment which is really sensitive. And the fan controls work great. So in particular, why I chose this, the Arctic over the Noctua, a lot of the other fan mods I've read about people doing with the Noctua is the airflow is not enough, especially for a power over Ethernet switch. And I plan to have at least probably 5 or 6 devices running off power over Ethernet here. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough airflow to cool the power supply, which from what I understand is the part that gets really warm, as well as cool the main board and not have something that's not too loud. But stick around after I do the install of the fans here, and I have a decibel recording of it, decibel meter recording, as well as a recording of how loud or how quiet these fans are. So this is a mod that I really recommend over the stock fans, especially if you're planning to do power over Ethernet, where the Noctua fan mod is probably not going to give you enough airflow or static pressure. So in this first part of the sound test, there's some coil whine on startup, so the switch does quiet down a lot after it boots up. And one last thing, after putting the case on, I purchased some rack ears to actually rack this in my switch. So I have a link in the description below. I was really impressed with this pair of rack ears, got off Amazon, with the quality of the hardware that they included. It's an aftermarket, but everything lined up perfectly. It looked like high quality chrome pieces. But yeah, everything worked. No complaints at all about these. And that's a lot of times people sell switches without rack ears and then gouge on the rack ears, but I think these were $13, so it wasn't a big deal. So in the end, I was able to get everything working with this switch. I still didn't figure out the ground fault issue on my GFCI outlet. But thanks for watching. If you have this switch and you have any questions about it, go ahead and leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks.